Some announcements. Oh, we're officially being recorded now.
We're officially being recorded.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Dan.
So, yeah, I was thinking, Courtney, we haven't done like an intern spotlight in a while.
You're right. And they've worked very hard this summer, so we should probably do that. For those of you who haven't gleaned already and maybe new to the Inner Loop and haven't had the chance to meet us in person at the bar, I'm Courtney and this is Rachel, and we are the co-founders, but we're very lucky that our team has grown over the years. We've got Dan manning the technical stuff. He's one of our board members. And as Rachel was mentioning, we've had two incredible interns helping us out.
Dan, spotlight them, spotlight them.
Yeah. Since January. We're going to embarrass Kiera, Wolfe,
Hi.
who will also be reading with us this evening. Thank you, Kiera, for all your amazing hard work. She's been our outreach intern since January, keeping all of you all in the loop with the goings on. And
she is an outreach rock star.
So, yeah, keeping us sane as well. And we're like, how do you do this social media thing? What is TikTok? I don't know.
We're already old.
We do not have an Inner Loop TikTok yet. Yeah, let us know in chat if that's something you want.
Not
no, we're not doing one.
I honestly still don't know what it is, so we'll just leave it there. And then Abby Newhouse, is she around tonight? I believe she is.
She's right there with her cat.
I can't see.
I'm here. Kitty's here. On the lookout.
There's Abby NC. Abby has also been with us since January. She has been our radio intern, helping Rachel get all of our new podcast episodes up, producing some of them, writing some of them, and she is a rock star as well.
Indeed.
Been fun.
So thanks for letting us embarrass you guys a little bit. You're great. Rach, turning it over to you for announcements.
So I what is today? The 15th? So yes. Kiera, is voting over for the Mayor's Arts Awards?
It ended yesterday.
Yes, it ended yesterday.
Courtney and I had to do a weird thing last night.
An unofficial announcement.
Yeah, no, because we haven't won, but it's just, it's a funny story and it's announcing the nomination. So anyway, we had to record an acceptance speech to send to the mayor's office in the event that we win. So we haven't won, but we had to pretend that we won and then record an acceptance speech.
So we had a good time last night doing a couple of takes of that.
Yeah, I'm going to put the bloopers on YouTube because they're just too good and ridiculous. Yeah,
subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'll put the link in our chat.
It's our newest social media outlet, thanks to Kiera. So yeah, hit up the YouTube channel, which will be in the chat. So that was fun. And then we've also been working on some projects in the works. The podcast has been going strong. We've been doing an amazing inspiration series, which is just super fun and interesting because we're having different authors around the city basically take over each episode and tell us how they're doing during the quarantine, how they're writing. Giving out a writing prompt and then trying the prompt themselves and reading what they came up with. So you really get like an intimate 10 minutes with your favorite local DC author. So check that out, the Inner Loop Radio. You can find it on our website or any podcasting app that you hang out with. What else?
I'm getting the tonight's program so that I can send it to everyone in the chat here. A couple of things just to note. I know that Emergent Seed is sponsoring another micro grant for artists and creatives in the DC area. So go ahead and check out Emergent Seed for a micro grant. And the Writer Center has another really awesome conference coming up or workshop coming up. Head over to their website. I believe that is in the end of September. I didn't commit the exact date to long-term memory, but they've got some cool stuff coming up as well. So just spreading the word on those. And one of the things we're excited about tonight is that we just wrapped up the 5th season of our summer residency program in partnership with the Woodlawn and Pope Leahy Houses and Arcadia Center for Sustainable Food and Agriculture. And Amanda and Sylvia and the team at Woodlawn has been incredible this summer, making sure that our writers were able to be on site at Woodlawn despite COVID restrictions. And so we were super grateful that that happened. The program has been growing every year. We have a cohort of 4 writers each spend a week on the estate thinking about place, reimagining place, what it means to be in and of a place, and who the people are who control it and tell its stories. And Woodlawn has some really rich history, both literary history and kind of American history. And so you'll be hearing a little bit more from our residents tonight as well. And I think that's all the announcements I had.
Yeah, there are a lot of things in the works, but that's, I think, it. Residency, radio, readings. We're doing enough. But yeah, so one of the biggest aspects of our live events is the feeling of community. And usually writers get to mingle and talk to each other and approach writers who have read that night and tell them how amazing they are. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen in a Zoom meeting, but we've done a few things to try to emulate it as best that we can. So we encourage everybody to use the chat. It's really great, I think, for writers to see immediate feedback of what they're reading. So, you know, put your reactions in the chat, you know, put it all in there. And it's really a nice way to substitute like the clapping and the laughter that you would normally hear during one of your readings. The other way is during intermission, we will randomly group everybody into little sub meetings for people to chat if they feel like it. If you don't feel pressured, just opt out. But it is a really nice way to just get to know somebody new. I mean, we've all been restricted in our homes, and so a little stranger danger could be good. So
community communicating.
Yeah, getting used to like making small talk again. And I always say that, you know, we all have one thing in common, and that's writing or our love of books and literature. So you can always talk about that, and that always makes it easier.
That's right. So I just posted the program, the virtual program, in the chat. It's a PDF document, so you can read more from all the writers that you'll hear from this evening, and that is the order of readings for the night. We will do, there's 2 columns. We'll do that brief intermission that Rachel was talking about will be after the first round, and that first round are our residency writers. So anyway, I think we've sufficiently babbled.
Is it time to get started?
Yeah, I think it's time to
get started. Let's get started. That's an inside Interloop radio joke, so if you don't get it, you need to go subscribe.
Well, so first of all, we are thrilled to welcome Kyoko Mori this evening for our featured reader. She joins us from George Mason and her home in DC with her cats, Miles and Jackson, who some of you may have met. Kyoko is the author of 4 novels, 3 nonfiction books, and her stories and essays have appeared in Best American Essays, the Harvard Review, the American Scholar, Colorado Review, Conjunctions, and others. As I mentioned, she teaches nonfiction writing in the MFA program in creative writing at George Mason University and at the low residency MFA program at Lesley University. And Kyoko is just one of those incredible literary citizens in DC, and she's always out and about supporting writers. And so we're just super excited to have her here with us this evening to read. Thank you, Kyoko.
Thank you. All right. I had to tell the cats to, just sit down. So this is an essay I wrote recently, and it's going to be in the Conjunctions next issue, which is called Dispatches from Solitude. And it's an issue about solitude. And I'm going to read the latter half rather than the first half, and trust that you might, want to read the first half. But I will tell you what's briefly in the first half, which is I talk about my parents, who really had very little in common, except that they both loved being with other people. They were both the life of the party. My mother had all her friends, come to our house. And my father went out after work, and he had friends and also girlfriends. They were not very happy together. My mother, after we moved to a house, away from her friends, she was very unhappy because she really didn't have any friends. And she became depressed, and she killed herself when I was 12. And her advice was, don't be like me. But I wasn't like her. Even as a child, I really loved being alone. So there's that. And then I talk about my marriage, how I was married for 13 years, then I got divorced because I wanted to be alone. So I'm gonna start from the very tail end of that section. As I told him, my husband, I didn't leave because he'd failed to be considerate. He was the only person I could have been married to for 13 years. But sooner or later, I had to accept I can't be my true self unless I'm alone. I can't think with another person breathing and thinking his own thoughts in the space where I am trying to do the same. My solitude, however, is not pure or simple. All my adult life, I've lived with cats who, contrary to the common stereotype, followed me around and plastered themselves to me. Dorian, my first cat, watched over my writing in the basement office, commuted with me to the apartment I rented to write in, and of course moved there with me when I got divorced. My 18 years with Dorian is the longest time I've gotten to spend alone together with anyone. Alone, together, that's how I think of the relationship between my cats and me. It is neither solitude nor companionship. It's more about merging, an expansion of the self into another being. If Dorian or his current successors, Miles and Jackson, could speak, I'm sure they would agree that the flow of energy or spirit between us is constant and mutual. I am them and they are me. They are the part of me who watches from a nearby perch while I go deep into my mind to retrieve the words I need to put on a page. I am the part of them who goes into the world to earn a living. We are one another's lifeline. My cats are not substitutes for partner, children, family, or friends. Our relationship is fundamentally different. Every human relationship requires a negotiation of the constantly shifting boundary between individuals or between the individual and the group. We go back and forth, getting closer, merging, separating, establishing some distance, then starting all over again. This ebb and flow is the challenge and the reward of marriage, family, friendship, mentorship, perhaps even patriotism or loyalty to an institution. Whether we're married or single, whether without families, we define ourselves through our interactions, positive, negative, intimate, distant, at times even hostile with others around us. We know who we are because we're like them, but we are not them. My cats don't offer or demand the same exploration of solidarity and autonomy. And it's not because they supposedly don't impose many restrictions on my life. Dorian, a Siamese cat who was extremely possessive, terrorized all my friends by biting them. Miles, another Siamese, paces in circles around me as if he's trying to corral me. He too is a one-person cat, though he's quietly disdainful rather than violent or aggressive toward other humans. Jackson, an easygoing Burmese, clambers onto my lap and presses his head against my hand until I start petting him. Their demand for my attention breaks the endless loops of thoughts, impressions, reverie, or idle chatter circulating through my mind. With them around, I'm not trapped inside my head, but because I don't perceive them as other. Whatever they want, and sometimes it's a long play session that interrupts the paragraph I've been trying to write, doesn't put me in the defensive mode that the intrusion of other humans almost always does. I pay attention to the cats and resume whatever I'm doing. My cats draw me out and then return me whole to myself. Being with them is the same and not the same as being alone. They complicate and expand my solitude. Alone at home all day, my mother felt trapped and diminished. After several hours away from home, surrounded even by my closest friends, I feel my entire being contracting into a pebble, soon to become a speck of dust. I need to get out of here, I think, or sometimes even say. That's what my mother must have thought too in her cold and dark kitchen. She was longing for the sense of freedom and wholeness she once enjoyed among her friends, just as I long for the sense of freedom and wholeness I can only experience at home, alone together with my cats. I never wanted children because I was certain that being with young children all day long, not having a moment to myself, would make me feel depleted and worn down. My mother worried that she would become further diminished when my brother and I left home. In our opposite ways, we wanted and want the same thing, to be our true, complete selves. My mother was suffering from isolation. She was cut off and disconnected from the outside world she needed to draw sustenance from. Although Webster's defines solitude as a quality or state of being alone or remote from society, and lists isolation as its synonym, the two are not the same. Isolation isolation results from an action, its verb form isolate, that forcibly separated the person from the whole he or she belonged to. Alone, my mother felt broken, like a tree cut down and removed from the forest canopy. For me, by contrast, being alone is a natural state. Surrounded by too many people for too long, I feel fragmented, disconnected. Without solitude, I become isolated from the private world that sustains me. Home is the most important place for my solitude, but unlike my mother, I'm free to come and go. In Washington, D.C., where I live now, I begin each morning with a run through Rock Creek Park and through various neighborhoods where I observe the weather, the seasons, the ceaseless human activity, trees and flowers, birds and other wildlife, and the national buildings and monuments with their complex, often troubling history. Far from being remote, I am immersed in both human society and the natural world, whether I'm running or later in the day, looking out the window at the mourning doves, chickadees, finches, sparrows, and cardinals, picking up the sunflower seeds in the feeder I stole in the window ledge to amuse the cats, immersed and yet choosing mostly to be separate. In my late 20s, still married, I found myself needing two kinds of solitude. Spending hours alone with my writing continued to satisfy my craving for quiet concentration, but the work required an active, complicated kind of solitude. I had to pay attention to every word I pulled out of my mind and put on the page, yet I also had to be in a dream state that allowed me to believe I could make something, a story or an essay that didn't exist until I wrote it. Being alone at my desk was at once exhilarating and exhausting. To complement the hours I spent there, I needed a less fraught kind of solitude, an interlude during which I was simply an observer or an amateur practitioner. Running, once I stopped competing, as I did in high school, was a source of this simpler solitude, but that only gave me an hour or two every day. So I took up a host of other solo activities, such as cycling, birdwatching, museum visits. For a while, I was able to balance time for my writing, time for my other solitary activities, and time with my husband. But I couldn't manage solitude, marriage, and community while trying to write and teach. I had a handful of close friends from graduate school and a few I have met since, but I struggled to make time for them. I volunteered at the nature center and the homeless shelter in town, only to stop after a couple of years when I felt overwhelmed. One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do, claimed a popular song of my youth. For me, 2 was the worst number. I was more isolated, perhaps even lonely, during my marriage than in the years I lived alone before and after. Like my mother, I was cut off from community. Even though my spouse was not a demanding person, being married meant my default mode was company. So every chance I got, I tried to be alone. When Dorian and I moved to my studio, the balance was reversed and righted. I no longer had to spend hours walking in the woods with binoculars or driving to faraway city to see art exhibits. I could be alone with Dorian every second I was home. With solitude as my default mode, I had a chance to spend time with friends and volunteer in the community when I wanted to. I have never believed in the notion of the better half, the myth that humans were originally created with 4 arms, 4 legs, and 2 heads, and that Zeus split us in 2 and condemned us to spend our lives in search of the missing half. I actually feel incomplete without my cats, but our union is a free-form, shape-shifting mystery, not a precise fitting together of half with half. When we were married, I thought of my husband as one of the people I could turn to for help if needed, but not as the person who was responsible for my happiness and welfare. The idea of having a special someone to take care of me always and forever struck me as oppressive and absurd. Even my mother could not do that for me or I for her. And if we had managed, then our relationship would have been as stultifying or deadly as her isolation in the house she hated. We would have stunted and suffocated each other in the shadow of those pine trees. What could have turned her isolation into solitude and kept her alive was not a daughter or a husband, but a community. My mother didn't have the opportunities to work outside the home or to participate in volunteer activities or political action. Her parents lived a day's journey away and her siblings had their own families. Without the friends who gathered in her kitchen every afternoon, she had just my brother and me. We were her only emissaries to and from the outside world. No wonder she imagined her future as endless years of isolation. I don't believe each of us needs one devoted companion, a soulmate, whether it's husband, wife, mother, father, or child. But we absolutely need friends, colleagues, neighbors, a group of like-minded people. Solitude only makes sense when we are connected to the world around us. We can't be apart unless we can be a part of. I chose a single life and a community over marriage. My ex-husband is now one of the old friends I stay in touch with. He's visited me in Boston and in Washington, D.C., the two cities I've lived in since leaving Wisconsin. And like my mother when she was happy, I make my home in an apartment building and have a couple, though not a dozen, neighbors who are my close friends. I too would have found the house on the hill gloomy and depressing in spite of its $1 million view. I prefer to be the middle of society, where I can carve out a small space to be alone and quiet. I have no desire to live like a hermit on vast acres of land or spend a night in a tent pitched in the wilderness. But in the last 5 years I lived in Wisconsin, I drove to the countryside by myself every August to watch the Perseids, meteor showers. Just a few miles out of town, farmhouses were spaced far apart and no one drove there after midnight. I would pull over on the side of the road next to a hayfield, climb on top of the car's roof and lie down. Meteors streaked across the sky every few minutes, some directly overhead, others in the periphery of my vision. There was no traffic on the roads, no planes in the sky. All I could hear was crickets, katydids, cicadas, and once in a while, dogs barking in the distance. I didn't believe in God or the afterlife, and the traditional concept of heaven, an eternity spent with multitudes of people who managed to hold on to the same creed through life's vicissitudes, was more horrifying than any vision of hell or the possibility of complete annihilation. But alone in the dark under the shooting stars that were actually particles of dust, I could imagine what death was like and not be afraid. Just the essence of me going on in the universe, released from who I was. Death, I hoped, would be the ultimate solitude of being apart and yet a part of. But I could only have these consoling thoughts about the universe and my mortality for about an hour before the sky began to look like a bottomless well I could drown in. Too much nature for too long was just as overwhelming as too much company for too long. The universe was so large and I was so small. This thought, though hardly new to me or to anyone, threatened to suffocate me and grind me down to nothing. So I would climb down from the top of the car, get behind the wheel, and head back to town. Even though I regretted leaving behind the stars that continued to fall, I knew I had to go. Dorian was always at the door when I got home. He would flop down on the floor and wait for me to pick him up. With him in my arms and my face buried in his fur, my mind expanded like a shriveled balloon receiving air. As we sat together on the couch, I could remember the dark country road as a place where I felt connected to the universe, to its endless space and time. Dorian was a part of me that stayed home and stayed safe, the keeper of my finite being. He secured me to myself so I could be alone. That's what Miles and Jackson are doing for me now, mid-August of this year of the coronavirus, as we shelter together from the global pandemic. The point of solitude is not to disappear from the world, but to claim a small territory around the self to say, I'm here, separate from everything that surrounds me, but a part of it. I no longer drive out to the countryside to watch the Perseids. but I know we are hurtling once again through a cosmic dust storm. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyoko. You'll see in the comments everybody is raving and they would like to know where they can read the rest of the essay. So maybe we can put a link in the chat.
That was
Wonderful. Okay, so we are going to transition to the residency readers. Courtney, did you want to say something?
So just as I said, this is our 5th cohort. We're really, really proud of them for adapting to this summer, and thankful again to Woodlawn for hosting them. I'm excited. You can see some more of their work up on our blog. If you go to the website and check out the blog, you can hear some more from their experiences. Yeah, and I will let them tell it because they're the ones who were there. But I just would like to remind all of our readers to be respectful of your fellows and try to stick to your 5-minute time limits. I will keep track.
Courtney's our timer. She always coughs and hums. Have you come up with a Zoom way? You just start.
I haven't. No. I just silently start grinding my teeth. Anyway, okay.
So Kyoko put in the chat that essay will be in conjunctions, which is super exciting. And we'll all be on the lookout for that. Okay, so kicking us off for the residency readers, we have 4 and then we'll have our intermission. So starting us off in nonfiction is Kristen, Zory, King.
Hi guys. It's great to be here with everyone tonight. I'm Chris. I, as was mentioned, was one of the 4 summer 2020 writers in residence this summer. And just before I get started, I want to just quickly give my thanks to the Woodlawn Estate and Pope Leahy House. I had a really phenomenal experience. Started a lot of new work, worked on some old work. I'm going to read 2 quick pieces today, one of which I wrote at the residency and one of which kind of deals with similar themes that I was working with there. So the first is just a really quick poem, and it's like a very, very, very early draft, but I wanted to be brave and share it, and just to kind of talk a little bit about the residency and what inspired it. So throughout my time there, I was just kind of really, in addition to working on projects, like whenever I got stuck, I would just keep a notebook of questions and then give myself like the luxury of time to really sit and like meditate on answers and kind of ponder and think through things. And inspired by a number of different elements of the property, from like very, very small details, like a very small etching of Mary Mason's name on a pane of glass. She's one of the residents of Woodlawn. To much larger elements like Frank Lloyd Wright's designs and his signature features. I started really thinking through this question of like, how do we leave our mark on the world? You know, whether that's kind of like planting perennials in the garden or noting your child's growth, or like I said, you know, these like larger architectural features or smaller etchings on glass, etc. I just thought through that, and I wrote more about it on the blog, which you can check out. But here is the early draft of the poem that I wrote based on that. It's called "You Will Not Always Hear Cicada and Bird Song." You will not always hear cicada and bird song. They are impermanent, like a paper cut or heartburn or the dogwood with its blight. So you etch your name to a small pane of glass, plant foxglove in the garden, use a knife to carve love into the tender flesh of birch and say, I was here. Beg, remember. I too watched light filter through the window, hoped it would tell me something I didn't already know. So that's that. And then the second piece, which is my nonfiction piece, it was actually written before the retreat and it was published this summer in Santa Fe Writers Project. But it explores memory, which is something I was thinking a lot about on the residency, and the way we kind of tell ourselves stories and make allegories from truth and memory. And it also explores nature and hiking and mythology and fear of being lost. So this is an excerpt from part 3 of the essay, which you can find on Santa Fe Writers Project. I was nursing a sour heart when I first moved to DC, grieving a dream mislaid, the details of which are as interesting as they are unique. A breakup, a cross-country move, a new job. It was mid-March when I walked into this new life, and while I could still feel the ice of winter in the wind, the world around me was beginning to thaw. This transition had been more difficult than anticipated, and I was haunted by feathered shadows of loneliness, waiting eagerly for each evening and weekend hour when I could take to the woods. As winter melted firmly into spring, I began walking farther, longer. Often, I didn't even look up the specifics of a trail. I would just wander until my legs pulsed with exhaustion. What I was seeking was difficult to name, and so instead I journeyed deeper each trail, my loneliness a small rock rolling around the bottom of my shoe. I began to crave these moments alone. There was much that was isolating in my new life, but here in the woods, with winking sprouts and long-tailed ferns as company, I felt far from alone. One morning, I got lost. Meandering past well-known paths, I was daydreaming, seeing anxieties instead of the trees, memories instead of moss-covered markers beside me. Suddenly, I was somewhere new, off track and unknown, a steep incline tangled with gnarled roots and loose stones. I tried to circle back, but that only made things worse. I had no idea where I was and foolishly had left my phone in my small studio apartment. Panicked, I began to seek totems of a way back. I enjoyed playing the recluse, but in truth, there was no one here to find me, to even notice I was gone. I'd withdrawn from the world, pushed too hard, retreated deeper and deeper until finally I had gone too far. Until a small yellow stripe on a tree, a marker that, while unfamiliar, signaled I was at least somewhere known to others. I started walking. The trail was less tread than those I was used to, but I began to notice signs of life. A makeshift staircase built from fallen wood, grooves in boulders that showed where others had pulled themselves up or over. I was not the first to explore this place, and I shared a moment of gratitude with the others before me who had carved a small path forward. I continued to climb for what was, in truth, only an hour, though it felt much longer. My calves ached from each incline, the arches of my feet beginning to soar from miles unprepared to tread. But I continued one clumsy step over muddy trail at a time until I saw a clearing ahead, an entrance to the woods from a neighborhood not far from my own. As I traded the soft earth for concrete, sounds of cars and children in yards overtaking the quieter music of the forest, I felt three things. The first was relief. Perhaps I was not as lost as I had supposed. The second was resilience. Perhaps I could find a way back on my own. But the third was something else entirely. Glancing back towards the trees, I noticed the sunlight filtering through the rich awning of leaves, throwing spots of shadow on the forest floor. I felt the humid seduction of each spellbound moment spent in their company. Perhaps what drew me to the woods and what led me out wasn't as easy as being lost and then found. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you so much to the Interloop and to Writers Residency and Woodlawn Poplacey House and Stephen, the awesome groundskeeper, and Christy, the awesome tour guide, and Amanda and everybody. Thank you so much.
I should note that Chris is also an amazing literary organizer and citizen. She runs Moonlit. She didn't mention that at all, but you should check out Movement DC.
We also have a retreat coming up, which I'll share a link for.
Please do.
Yeah, actually, the retreat looks really amazing for anybody who needs like care for their writerly soul. You should check it out.
Yeah. So our next resident who will be sharing work with us this evening is James Steck.
Hi, I also want to quickly thank everyone for the opportunity that I had over the summer to be a part of this residency. I found it very cathartic in a lot of ways, and it was great to kind of be in a space that wasn't my small studio apartment for a period of time, and to also meet some lovely people. I will read two of the poems that I did produce there. and maybe a third if there's some time. And the first one is called Future Song. Infinite trees with infinite leaves spread to the horizon and shudder in the wind-thick air, vibrating. Lightning above. Infinite trees, we live below. Look down and see our shadows. We smoke with our backs against your bark. As your skin falls apart behind us, hair is rigid on the neck when we feel the static, burnt wood. Infinite trees in a gasp of lightning. Some belong to families, others belong to houses. Some belong to the woods, some belong to children, and some are crushed with vines. Others don't grow just right. Some die slowly in the night. Infinite trees with infinite leaves now saturated with rain. Your unyielding, smoking wood we turn into tabletop art. Can't stop dancing beneath shade or smoking with backs against bark. Widespread leaves keep me down below, keep me from climbing, and keep me here. The infinite trees with their infinite leaves. We are skeletons of wood, just like the rest, waiting for a future song, act of alchemy, energy, your hand that has just been touched for the first time, your smile that is real beneath the leaves. There is the smell of thunder, like wet smoke, like your skin absorbing the night through a window, absorbing quiet, humid streets in the summer heat. You know what the thunder smells like, but you don't know me until the rain is there in the dark. I don't know you, but I know what the thunder smells like too. I've seen lightning twist wood around into muscle or split it through the middle, set fire to the stillness. And I know the future, if I went far away, looked at a black hole so closely in the warped time and space, I could come back to the earth and hold your hand again and kiss you purple. But old eyes can't read lyrics when eyes drift like leaves. Expedited time to hold your hand if you were 90 then like the trees, and lived a life staring up, singing a future song, waiting for the air to vibrate. So I reach over now to set my glasses down beside the wooden bed and lay still to wait for the lightning as well, next to the hyacinths and the can of beer. All right, the next poem was heavily influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect who designed the Pope Leahy house. And I found myself quite enamored with who he was in his life and this weird kind of situation I found myself in, just like in somebody's house that somebody built. And I kind of found myself almost feeling like I was inside of his own body, his own skeleton, and looking from the inside out. So this is called To Frank Within the Pope Leahy House. Your house is here, Frank. I sit in your architecture. I observe your texture. A groundhog comes to the window, sticks his nose right on the glass, looks me in the eyes. Could have been you. I don't know much, but it could have been you. We measure our lives with algorithms. The groundhog just looks for food. I just sit and write here inside of you. Your algorithm was on paper, in geometry, gliding graphite along graphs. I sit here in your structure. I step into your construct. I see the backside of your ribs. You don't know my ribs, Frank, but I measure my time just like you. You build order among particles. I sit in the architecture of your immortality, Frank. I teach high school. I don't know about building homes. I don't have millions, nor does anyone know me. I have no Wrightian style, no unique accent of verse to be analyzed here. But I see the backside of your ribs, and your heart is clear. I see your stomach churn behind the wood, the veins and the grain, your still blood liquid here. Are you in love, or just the groundhog passing by, or the red fox, ears perked, listening? Is my presence unsettling, or do I comfort old fingerprints on old brick bones? I consider your dark eyes, smooth forehead, and thin lips. I see how many years you've lived within the rings of the wooden soul and watch condensation drip. If you knew decades ago, I would be here, aware of your time, aware of your wives and your architectured life. If I watched you in the morning, laying next to you, had just woken up, watched you yawn in sync with the dew on your windows outside, would that be Wrightian, or am I just measuring time? There have been families inside of you, yelling, loving, children, death in a pond and tea on a stove, sweat in the night and hands on the inside of your eyes, leaving stains against the glass. I sit inside as a tourist walks by, taking pictures through that glass. I'm bothered, Frank. I sit and consider you. Your skeleton I applied to. We have a deal you never agreed to. We are together, you and I, and the wandering photographer doesn't know that I know when you were born and if you are still alive in the past in that other dimension, time. I know when you die. I know about Catherine, Mama, Mode, Algivana. I know how Mama will die and the morphine within Mode. Your architecture remains. Leave skeletons alone. This will do. We can talk like this. I can warn you now to not worry about death, to leave the houses unbuilt, to leave the woods to the groundhog and the fox. But there is no message I can send, no rewriting an algorithm, no truth against the world to reach into the reverse and tap you on the shoulder to feel something other than. It's the end of that poem. I think I'm probably out of time, so thank you very much.
Beautiful, James. Thank you. Okay. Next fiction. Were you laughing at me? So many like pop-ups on the screen. It takes like a while to gather, like focus my thoughts on the.
I was also processing, like I was still in the poem. So.
Yeah, it's hard to like transition from listener to host. Okay, next in fiction, Julia Tagliere.
Thank you. And yeah, now I have to read after trying to come out of the poem.
That's how that goes.
Well, I too would like to say thank you to the Woodlawn Estate and to the Popley residents. Everything about the experience surprised me, starting with the fact that you were able to actually pull it off for us. So for that, I remain eternally grateful. I was surprised by the hurricane that closed it for one of my days. I was surprised by the first day that I was there, deciding to go and spend the day at the Pope Leahy house, which I had not really planned on spending a lot of time at. I really thought I'd be more at the Woodlawn Estate. And then being so drawn into the Pope Leahy house, I never went back to Woodlawn. So I definitely have a reason to come back and spend some time there and hear what those walls have to say. The whole thing was a surprise. I worked on things I had no intention of working on. I went back to work that I thought was finished and found greater depths to plumb, and did create some new material both for the estate as well as for my work in progress, which is another collection of short stories. And it's all set in the Reliance building in Chicago, and it's very much dictated by place and the stories in those walls. So this is a draft of a piece that I wrote while I was there and did a little bit of editing on since then. So about a second draft. It's called Mr. Herbert Eats the Rich. Carriage wheels wake me as they crunch to a stop on the crusty black snow in front of the Reliance building, where I've lived and worked since the Great Fire. Without the din and racket coming from Mr. Hale's grand new lobby below, I've started waking later and later for my night shift. I hop off my cot, pull my braces back up, and stick my head out the window to see who it could be. Mr. Hale's had the men halt work for a few days out of respect for poor Mr. Root, so I've had the building pretty much to myself. But I guess I won't have to worry about that much longer either, since, according to Mr. Hale's letter, my services as night watchman will no longer be required when this phase of construction is completed. By the fast-fading February light outside, I judge it near supper time. Not that that means much to me these days. 2 fine carriages are stopped below. One I don't recognize, but the other one is Mr. Hale's. Odd time to pay a social call to a work site. I reach into my pocket, tear off another piece of paper, just about the last of it, and cram it into my mouth. I chew quickly, trying to calm my rumbly stomach as I slip into my uniform and hurry down the back stairs. And by the time Mr. Hale and the skinny gentleman accompanying him are halfway up, I'm already at the top waiting for them. Evening, Mr. Hale, I say, tipping my cap. Good evening, Harold. How are you? Mr. Hale extends a hand to me. It feels beefy in mine, and it reminds me how long it's been since I last had a bit of meat to chew. Fine as can be, Mr. Hale. How are you doing? He gestures to the man beside him. This is Mr. Charles Atwood, Herbert. I've invited him to look around the building to get a feel for the project. He glances down at the black sateen mourning ribbon he still wears pinned to his breast for Mr. Root and clears his throat. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Atwood, I say. If I can help you in any way, just let me know. I tip my cap once again and turn to go, but feel those fleshy fingers on my shoulder. Just a moment, Harold. Mr. Harold gestures to Mr. Atwood. Charles, would you be so kind as to wait for me? There's a small office through that door. Of course. Good evening, Mr. Herbert. Mr. Atwood's fine mustaches lift at the corners, like a drawing I once saw of a walrus, and I catch a sudden whiff of something sweet, like pipe smoke, or maybe an orange blossom. At least how I've always imagined an orange blossom might smell. Herbert, Mr. Hale says, I must speak with you on a matter of some urgency and also of some discretion. My stomach grumbles again, and I finger the last of the paper tucked in my pocket. I follow a step or two behind Mr. Hale as he talks. As I'm sure you can imagine, Herbert, we were all terribly shocked by the news of Mr. Root's untimely death. I nod, appropriately somber for the death of such a young man, only 41. Yes, that was quite the shock, sir. Suspending work has allowed us both to honor his memory, as well as to give Mr. Burnham time to find an architect sufficiently gifted to complete Mr. Root's vision for Reliance. So it'll be Mr. Atwood then, sir, I ask. Beg pardon, sir. Yes, Herbert, I believe Mr. Burnham has settled upon Mr. Atwood. Well, that's fine news, I say, pressing my fist against my stomach to stop a pulpy belch. Will the men be getting back to work then? Mr. Hale stops and looks down at his feet. Not yet. You see, we've encountered a slight problem with the plans for the building. You don't say, I think to myself, widening my eyes just the right amount of concerned. Apparently, and I've only just learned of this, apparently, Mr. Root did not believe in making copies of his plans. No copies, you say? I widen my eyes even bigger to the size of the last dinner plate I saw. No, Harold, shocking, isn't it? Mr. Hale shakes his head, looking sad. He had this extraordinary talent. He just spread out a large sheet of that heavy brown paper. I'm sure you saw some of it around here these last months. Why, yes, I did, I think, nodding as innocently as a man ever has. And sketch in a seemingly single stroke the whole project pulled straight from his mind onto the paper. Mr. Hale sighs again. It was a remarkable gift. That sure is a gift, I say, and my stomach rumbles again. Mr. Hale looks around as if checking for spies. Unfortunately, Herbert, since his death, we've been unable to find Mr. Root's plans. You don't say. The plan for this building, you mean, as in Reliance? Mr. Burnham has searched his offices and Mr. Root's home to no avail. We wondered if the original plans might still be here, somewhere in the building. Do you recall having seen them? The drawing would have been rather large, about so big. He spreads his hands wide to indicate the plan's size, which is about half as big as Mr. Root actually drew them. And done on that heavy brown paper he favored. Do you remember seeing anything like that? I tilt my head to the side and make like I'm thinking, but really, I just study the ceiling, thinking about the expensive marble I heard them planning to finish it with. I take my time before answering. No, sir, I can't say that I have. I pretend a sudden thought. Does that mean you won't be able to finish the building? No, not at all, but it certainly will delay us. And as you know, every day's delay is money lost. Mr. Hale sighs again. Don't I know it? I give a sympathetic nod. Mr. Atwood is a gifted architect in his own right, but naturally, we prefer to complete Reliance as Mr. Root envisioned it. He faces me directly now. Mr. Herbert, could I ask your assistance in searching the building for Mr. Root's plans? Without them, Mr. Atwood and Mr. Burnham will have to essentially start all over. I would compensate you for your time. He pulls from his wallet a thick stack of bills and presses them in my hand. I'll do my best, Mr. Hale, I promise. Mr. Hale smiles and gives me a hearty pat on the back. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Herbert. I can rely on your discretion, I presume? Of course, Mr. Hale, not a word to anyone. I lock my lips with air and throw away the key. Thank you, Herbert. If you do find them, please get a message to me and keep them safe. He widens his eyes at me like a dinner plate. They are, after all, the only copy. Don't you worry, sir. I'll keep those plans as safe as can be. Thank you, Harold. Good evening, then, and good luck with your search. Thank you, sir. Good evening to you, too, sir. I wait for the echo of Mr. Hale's heavy footsteps to fade away completely before I count the bills he pressed into my hand and tuck them inside my shirt. Then I stuff the last of the heavy brown paper from my pocket into my mouth and dream of a nice fat steak as I chew. That's the end. Historical note, Mr. Root actually did only ever make one original copy of his plans. The plans for the Reliance building were never found after his death, and they did have to start over from the foundation of the building to its completion. So that's my little story.
Thank you, Julia. That was awesome. And I love the historical note. Always important to include those. Yeah, what we love is that everyone in the residency, you know, every year this happens, the writers go in with an idea of what they think they're going to write or plan on writing, and they come out with often something very different. The space kind of speaks to them, and it's just really fun to hear what it says through them. So thank you. So the last of our residents from the summer to share with us this evening is Twee Din, and she's up next. Twee, 1 second. I think you're still muted.
Okay, I think I'm
there you go. Yep.
Yeah, you're
okay,
good.
thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Rachel, and thank you, the Woodlawn Popley staff. I had a really great time this summer. I think my impression when I got there was I felt a little bit overwhelmed. The buildings, to me, at first, architecturally, they are like two seemingly very different buildings. So as I walked through them, I thought the way I could write about is how these differences, the contradictions, are like illusions, and how, you know, comparing these differences, the opposites, you know, in the architectural styles, I can also talk about the contradictions within myself as a refugee and as an Asian American writer. So the pieces that I will read today are 3 shorter pieces from a longer essay, and the pieces will explore the contradictions that I, you know, have mentioned before. And so I think I'm just going to launch into the pieces right now. The first one is called Hyphen. Architecturally, the term hyphen is the connecting link between a main building and an outlying wing, typically found in 18th century Georgian mansions. A hyphen can symbolize both inclusion and exclusion, for it was the passageway slaves used to reach the heart of a plantation home where they needed to perform household tasks, but where they did not belong and often were not seen. A hyphen aspires to neutralize opposing forces. A hyphen is the center. A hyphen symbolizes marriage. A hyphen thrives in ambiguity and silence. A hyphen is irresolute, lacking integrity. A hyphen doesn't have a hymen. A hyphen is a far-flung colony connected to an imperial center. Applied to a person, it can be a stalemate or an alliance between selves. The Chicago Manual of Style and AP Style book have eschewed the hyphen, for it was regarded by some as suggestive of bias. Identity descriptive terms such as African American, Arab American, Asian American, Hispanic American are now written without hyphens. Is it because a hyphen reinforces the 19th century notion of separate but equal? The second piece is called Mirrors and the Laughing Demon. During my residency, I tried to write a story told by an unnamed narrator about Frances, the Lewis's eldest daughter, and her enslaved maid, who is also named Frances but called Frankie. During meal times at Woodlawn, Frances, through the butler's mirror, can see Frankie carrying cider-glazed duck, fried tripe, and pumpkin pudding into the dining room from the hyphen that connects the kitchen to the formal dining room. Sometimes Frances wonders what it would be like if she and Frankie switched places. But most of the time, she can't fathom this at all. Her lack of imagination feels like blindness. And Frankie feels another kind of blindness that's more like muteness. She can't read, so the things around her are just earthbound things, but she understands metaphors for lightness and flight, embodied by the robin redbreast alighting on a bald cypress outside her window, or the speckled butterflies fluttering among Mrs. Lewis' blush china roses. I added a twist by having Mark Twain appropriate the unnamed narrator's story and turn it into his novel. His version changes the historical setting and gender of the characters. So in his novel, Prince Edward, Henry VIII's son, and Tom, a pauper, decide to trade places since they happen to look exactly alike, as if the thing that separates them is class. Twain became more explicit in his view on racial justice a few years later in Huckleberry Finn by having Huck and Jim sail down the Mississippi River as companions and equals. I haven't finished writing my story yet, but the Woodlawn butler's mirror continues to haunt me. Like Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon, this mirror distances the watcher from the watched, at the same time turning the world under its gaze into a self-regulated, intimate cage. This brings to mind another story from my reading past. In the Vietnamese parable, the pine gates are shut. A Zen warrior monk is given a magic mirror to see through the disguises of demons before killing them. After 7 years of hunting and killing demons, the monk is tired of using his magic mirror. For sometimes he sees familiar, even lovable features in the demons he destroys. In equal measure, seeing good people illuminated by his magic mirror no longer lifts his spirit. Upon his return to the monastery, the monk finds the gates shut and his entry barred. When gazing into a stream by the monastery's entrance, he sees the demon looking back, laughing. And my last piece is called Dragonfly. One day on the Woodlawn Estate, I followed a dragonfly and snapped its picture. I read somewhere that a dragonfly life lasts only a day. Thus, it's considered a symbol of impermanence. But the dragonfly's seeming fragile black and white form, against the greenness of the Virginia landscape, evoked this beautiful tension between the transient and the cyclical, the way nations and historical buildings evolve with time due to subsequent uses by different groups of inhabitants. And who is to say that an 80-year-old building like the Pope Leahy House that was dismantled and transplanted from its original site in Fall Church to Woodlawn Plantation in its 24th year, or a 200-year-old house like the Woodlawn Mansion that has been rebuilt and repaired so many times, is not on the same existential plane as a one-day dragonfly? Age is relative, depending on the circumstances, subject to interpretation. Many refugees change their birth dates, names, and reinvent their lives in the new environments. And death, like the loss of a home or a country, can, with time, bring in a new chapter. Thank you, everyone.
So beautiful and contemplative. I just felt like wooed and rocked. But Courtney, isn't it time for an intermission?
It is, and I just want to say to all the residency writers, you should, if you didn't have a chance, go back and look at the chat because everyone was really loving your work. And again, everyone can read more from them on the blog. If you're interested in participating in the residency program next summer, God willing, it will happen. Shoot us a note at the Interloop. But again, thank you to our partners at Woodlawn and Poplahi. It's just, again, like so amazing to see what you all produce there with just a week. So really beautiful. But yes, it is time for a little intermission. We're gonna break everyone up into smaller groups. Feel free to chat with each other. Don't feel obligated to do so. I went ahead and took my own advice and made Manhattan this time around. So if you need to refill your drink or get some food or take a bathroom break, go ahead and do that too.
But don't go away. We have 4 more amazing readers.
That's right.
Anywho, let me find there it is, program. Okay, so we've got 4 amazing readers, and by that I mean super amazing, and I'm so excited to hear from all of them. And like 3 out of 4 are Interloop alum, 2 out of, I don't know. Anyway, they're all familiar. So kicking it off in poetry, hopefully reading from her brand new collection is Interloop alum Tara Campbell.
Tara!
Hello, hello.
Tara! Oh God, I do it every time. Forgive me.
You know what?
Now everyone's gonna remember it's Tara.
Yes, Tara. It's Tara. No, we're all online now, so all pronunciation bets are off. But yes, I am reading from my new book, Political AF, a rage collection, because these are rage-filled times. So I'll just read 3 poems. One of them is super short, and as you can see, it is a shaped poem, and it's called Cauliflower. When cauliflower gets curious, it asks to touch the tighter buds of broccoli's crown, wonders if they would look as good in white. When cauliflower gets restless, it considers a tattoo, a little green band around its stalk, or maybe just a butterfly. Better yet, henna, something exotic but impermanent, because who wants to be stuck that color forever? The next work, I guess this will give you kind of an idea of the range of rage. So that was about race. This is about reproductive freedom, or the lack thereof. And it's called Vessels of the State. We will no longer refuse you. We will give birth and give birth to all required infants from all of our partners and all our assailants, and we will give birth to whatever we can, from babies to manna, to Bibles, to frying pans. We will give birth to world peace and war. We will give birth to more and more and more, and we will give birth to swarms of locusts and shaggy red devils with razor-sharp horns. And we will give birth to dashing steel daggers and gleaming new teeth. And we will give birth to braziers and pitchforks to praise you. For you, we will grow as many vaginas as Kali has arms. Our vulvas will steam, sulfuric, primordial, deliver your mandates and scald doctors' hands with Vesuvial pitch. We'll never stop birthing and crossing state lines, dropping your children like landmines until tempests whirl from sin-tainted chasms and chains pour forth from between our legs to hold us down, and still we will bear lava and wait for our lovers, our husbands, our rapists, our fathers, our uncles, our brothers. We'll bear for them too and praise them and raise up new sons and new vessels, just as you command of us, vessels of the state. And for my third and last poem, I always like to end on a little hope because Lord knows we need it. So this poem, if you'll remember, way back, say 3 years ago, an eternity ago, there were 7 words and phrases that the CDC was advised not to use for best chances at getting and maintaining funding. So I wrote a poem called "In Contradiction to the Commander's Standards and Wishes." I base my poetry on science, in contradiction to the commander's standards and wishes. I sing of diverse transgender fetuses, write evidence-based verse in praise of science-based wonders, rhyme vulnerable with beautiful, while capital millionaires line their pockets with non-chlorophyllic green and almost forget to chip the children in their trickle-down amnesia. I base my poetry on science, in consideration with community standards and wishes, based on faith, in reason, in empathy, in data, in compassion, in knowledge, in questioning, in resistance. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. And if you can throw into the chat where folks can find your book, that would be great. Next up is our very own Kiera Wolfe. I'm gonna hide my video, Kiera, so I can try to capture you on screen. Okay.
Excellent, thank you, I appreciate that. I'm going to be reading a short section from a story that I had the privilege to write or work on and revise at one of our residencies. And it was right before the quarantine started and the pandemic really kind of hit everyone as being serious. And I remember like Rachel brought everyone in for a hug and she was like, savor this, it might be the last hug you have for a while. And it was, she was true, she was right. Then writing this piece and working on this piece was kind of the last time I like felt peace. Okay, so we're cutting in the middle here, and Kyle is staying with his Aunt Esther for the summer. Kyle slept in the room that had once been his mother's. Any lingering trace of her girlhood was gone. It had been his and only his for years. Esther made a point of making it so, decorating and fossilizing its walls. Each summer, new additions stacked over the old like layers of sedimentary rock. When he lifted a movie poster or photo, he found crayon drawings, birthday cards, or old concert tickets nestled underneath. When Kyle stopped supplying decor himself, Esther began curating for him, printing blurry hiking photos of the back of his head, harvesting and hanging the dedication pages of books he recommended she read. Kyle didn't have the heart to tell Esther he hated the room. The jagged edges of the torn pages made him wince, and the overlapping, underlayering, crisscross collage made his head hurt. Too many corners and lines and edges shooting off into nothing, into each other, into infinity without resolution. He knew his mother would hate it, and that was why he hated it. And sometimes that was enough to drive him to love it, but he could never maintain the sentiment for long. He also knew it was the sort of thing he should like. He recognized the flash of surprise and confusion when his friends flipped through photo albums for school projects, and Kyle admitted he had none. No school photos or yearbooks or shoeboxes full of foggy 4x6s in some half-finished basement overflowing with memory. His mother kept 2 framed photos of him, rendered in a soft black and white on the dresser in the guest room. one of an infant and one of a young teen. They were removed and tucked into the closet when the room was occupied by guests. It was a grounding principle of her design aesthetic that there be no human faces used as decor. He was the only exception. The frames crystallized his mother's affection, condensed it into a space he could grab and hold. Esters flapped all around him, layering and layering until one day the walls would reach together and touch. As the sun set, the window cast a soft orange light that bisected the room between marmalade and shadow. His mother loved windows. This was probably the first window she had loved. She would scrap an entire plan, entire intricate mess of slanting walls, roofs, concrete, granite, if it meant perfecting the way light sunk through a single window. A full wall of their living room in Los Angeles was glass, floor to ceiling glass like a glaze of liquid sugar. She washed it herself, the only part of the house she forbid the maid to touch. Kyle closed his eyes and sniffed at the memory of Windex clinging to her moisture-wrinkled fingertips. The first time the wall killed something, Kyle was only 8. A young deer, running from some invisible fear, smashed against his mother's window with enough force to half-snap its neck. The sound of the impact sent a chill over his brow, drew his gaze from his geometry homework. He was home alone. Kyle remembered kneeling by the wall, eyes wide, and watching as the deer's chest rose and fell in quick bursts like there was water boiling beneath its tawny skin. Its head lay at an angle his brain could not make sense of. The slender neck had twisted to make something like an isosceles triangle. Or was it scalene? His mother would know. He remembered looking at the clock, wondering when she would be home to help him make sense of things. She was good at that. Angles and lines and rules. The deer's writhing became more frantic. He couldn't remember if he knew it was dying. He reached out to touch it, to smooth its fine hair, aiming to comfort, but also to feel the flesh of another creature, to reach beyond the forbidden. His hand hit glass. She was cross with him for the fingerprints. Thank you.
Sorry, I was feeling the feels. I just love how you made all the objects like full of feelings. That's all I'm gonna say. So, thanks, Kiera. Okay, next in nonfiction, Ted Scheinman.
Hi, folks. Thanks to Rachel and Courtney for having me, and among such great readers. I'm going to be reading today an excerpt from this book, Camp Austen, My Life as an Accidental Jane Austen Superfan, which is a sort of light-hearted study of the subculture of Janeites, as they call themselves. And I'm going to be reading from the 3rd chapter, which is about table talk, manners, and gossip. When friends and colleagues heard that I was reporting on the eccentric world of Jane Austen superfans, one question was uppermost. Do people hook up at Jane Austen camp? At first, I grew irritated at these questions, which seemed to assume that Austen cosplay is centrally about sex somehow. It's not, really. It's mainly about books, and only a little bit about sex. Still, I came to meet quite a few older couples for whom the Jane Austen summer camp doubled as a romantic getaway, a chance to rediscover the pleasures of flirting with one's spouse. There are academic power couples across the world whose unions owe their beginnings to an indiscreet moment at an Austen conference, and at the major Janeite gatherings, I occasionally met a child conceived, the parents assured me, with the aid of Austen's prose as aphrodisiac. Most of the couples, though, are mixed marriages, wherein one partner is the true believer and the other partner a willing or sporting participant. On the first evening of the summer camp, I met one such couple, a vivacious pair of 60-somethings, the woman slim and glamorous in her bonnet and evening gown, and the man stout and kindly in an officer's uniform, rarely taking his eyes off his wife, whom he regarded at all times with a smile that mingled deference and infatuation. While we sat together over a late dessert, they explained to me their routine. He had never read a word of Jane, she told me, but the first time I asked him to join me at an Austen ball, he didn't blink. He went to have his costume fitting the very next day. The husband nodded. And we have our games, he conceded, sounding almost bashful. He means courtship, she translated. The man grinned and put down his cake fork. Sometimes we will separate before the ball and observe one another from across the room, he began. His wife cut in. And sometimes we dance with other people. The statement had a quality of risque confession, and she raised her eyebrows. The husband giggled. She lends me out, he explained. There are so few men around, and she likes to see the women dancing. Liar, she declared in triumph. He's being very bad. The reason I have him dance with other people is so I can watch him. She squeezed his hand. He's very good, and it is thrilling to watch him charm the others. He demurred. She persisted. You can be so charming, and I'm not sure you even know it. But we always end up together, the man continued, dodging the compliment. His wife leaned toward me and spoke in a stage whisper, widening her eyes suggestively. We always pretend it's the first time that we're meeting. That actually sounds really fun, I said. It is. My friends tease me about it. She laughed. They say that we are kinky. That's not what it's about, the man said quickly. That's not why. She took his hand in both of hers. It's nothing improper, just a little game, a vacation almost. She broke off and they looked at each other, and it was difficult not to think of Admiral and Mrs. Croft in Persuasion, whose mutual good humor and evident marital bliss make such an impression on Anne Elliot. Like the Crofts, this couple have no children, and like the Crofts, after many years of marriage, they are still visibly in love. Following a long, private pause, the husband turned to me and said, It can be a pleasure to meet one's wife as a stranger. The next day, I spotted the wife traipsing across the quad with 2 other women. The husband followed them at a distance of a few paces, laden with various objets. His wife's reticule, a tiny period handbag, dangled from his right wrist. On his left arm was a tote bag with an image of Colin Firth and a frilly collar, and he busied his left hand snapping photos of the 3 ladies. They smiled at his camera and pretended to primp their hair like Betty Boops of the Regency. Before the quartet exited my field of vision, I saw the husband bounding in pursuit of his wife, yelping and waving the reticule in the air. When we bumped into each other the next day, he told me he was worried his wife had forgotten her heart pills. My wife said I made a spectacle of myself, he told me, smiling at the figure he had cut. Still, it would hardly have been good manners not to inquire. And that's it for me.
Good heavens, not a spectacle. Who wants to make a spectacle? Thank you, Ted, that was great. So we have one more reader. Wait, am I unmuted? Yeah. The host is, this notification is still up. I don't know what's happening. I have like a notification. Anyway, later, unmute. Okay, I don't know. We have one final reader this evening. Catherine Gecker is joining us, and she is going to read some poetry.
Thank you. Thank you, Courtney and Rachel, for including me in this reading. Boy, what fantastic readers and what amazing work. I'm just inspired and blown away and everything. I'm going to read 2 poems from my book, In Search of Warm Breathing Things. The book is deals with a lot of the relationships, both tender and aching and painful, that we have with each other, including the end of a marriage and the loss of a mother. The first poem is one that I wrote while taking a workshop with the wonderful Rose Solari at the Writer Center in Bethesda. It takes place before parking apps existed. Solving for the unknown. Poetry class starts at 7:30. I arrive at 7:15. Parking costs 25 cents for 30 minutes. Meters are enforced till 10. Class ends at 9:45. When I spot classmates, I casually disclose, I left my watch at home. I've put 27 quarters in the meter. Is that enough? Each week, I find a different person to ask. I buy rolls of quarters at the bank. The teller can't tell me how many quarters I need. She says she doesn't understand poetry. Meter maids patrol the lot, ticket the scofflaws, extract clattering coins from machines. Tonight, I insert 5 quarters into my parking meter. Their drop, systolic rhythm, their sequence, iambic pentameter. The quarters race through dark pipes, like cells raced through my mother's glands. When our father died, my brother and I lost 1/4 of our family. When our mother died, 1/3 of our family was gone. Now, here I am, stuffing quarters into a slot, calculating. The second poem is an Abecedarian poem. Abecedarians are an ancient form, guided by alphabetic order. Usually the first line begins with A, the next line begins with B, and I bet you can guess the rest. You'll see that I kind of cheated in this poem because I used the letters A, B, C, and D all in the title. And by the way, almost everyone cheats with the letter X, at least in English they do. Alcohol beckons constantly, derails each and every day earlier and earlier. Your breakfast juice, firewater, which means forlorn me, followed by medicinal gimlet. You're ginned up long before cocktail hour, hosed by metallic vodka, ice cubes clinking against cut crystal. Those jazz Jezebels jockey with your reason. Your mind, the whole kit and caboodle, goes kablooey. You say, let the drinking begin. I say you lush, it never stops. Look in the mirror, that's you smashed by margaritas. Not that you drink indiscriminately, no. You nurse only one rule, keep drinking. You pour another, pursue your pickled quest, a quagmire of doctored quinine, righteous, rigid, ruined in rum. You're sloshed, snookered by scotch, trashed, tumbled under the table, useless. You're vacant, veer away from me, seek vermouth, weeping, whiskey wasted, wankered. I long to be an X, yearn to unyoke from you, you zonked zombie. Soon I will swing from a crystal chandelier, catapult through the open window, and disappear into the night. Zorro. No, Zora. Thank you.
Oh man, that was great. I wish I'd unmuted myself sooner so you could hear my raucous
Your
laugh.
cackle. There it is.
Wow, Courtney, way to call me out.
I love your cackle.
Man, what an amazing reading. I feel so filled.
I know, tonight was wow.
Tonight was wow.
Tonight was wow. Thank you, really, everyone. Thank you, Kyoko, again, for joining us as feature. Thank you to the residents for sharing your experiences, and thank you to everyone else for sharing your words. We love knowing that there's just such a vibrant and diverse community of writers in DC, and we love showing that off, even if it's just for each other and ourselves. Though I will say we had, the one benefit of this whole virtual Zoom thing is that I chatted with a few people. Someone was in Chicago, someone else was in LA, so we're able to reach beyond our region, which is really great. So thank you all for keeping on and for keeping inspired and keeping us inspired. I think I told my small group during the intermission that Rachel and I always say this is a selfish endeavor because, at the end of the day, when we're exhausted from everything else, we get to hear you, and it just reminds us why we write. So thank you.
If you want to see and hear more from us, check us out on the interlooplit.org, and our podcast is super fun and awesome.
And submit, if you were in the audience
Oh
tonight.
yeah, tell all your friends. We're like short on submissions for next month, so tell all your friends to submit.
We're not short.
Right. And then you can come back and hear them and see us.
That's right. That's right. We're always looking to feature new writers, and we don't discriminate. We like, Kristen shared a first draft. We love first drafts, messy first drafts, right?
Works in progress, polished pieces, whatever.
Whatever you feel like you want to share or that you want to get feedback on. We also are happy to connect you with other writers in the community. People also often reach out to us and say, hey, I'm working on X. Do you have anyone who might have insight on that? So drop us a line with anything. We'd like to be connectors whenever possible. So thank you all for being here, for sharing your evening with us.
Bye.
Bye.